Hi. Welcome to part 2 of the series that I'm doing here on this channel about my vampire book collection. I have a lot of vampire books, and this specific video will be focusing on I'm very excited for this one because we're going to be focusing on two of the most culturally influential vampire books to ever grace the genre ever. You've probably heard of the first one. You've definitely heard of the second one. They are, obviously, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, circa 1872, and Dracula by Abraham Stoker, circa 1896. I am going to be comparing these two. Specifically, I'm going to be discussing themes that these two books explore of the Victorian fears of homosexuality as a form of parasitic love, and fears of the corruption of the innocent, the corruption of the Madonna, the corruption of the boyish heterosexual. These two books are prime examples of the vampire genre's exploration of queer sexuality, how the vampire genre is so tied to queerness. And I'm going to be discussing the comparisons between the two. I'm also going to be talking a bit about Carmilla as in its own book, just for a bit, because it is the shorter story, and I'm thinking of doing a bigger rant, because I wouldn't call these video essays. I think they're too poorly researched to be called video essays, but I think they count more as just me rambling in my room. But Carmilla being the shorter story is I'm gonna just talk about a few things I find interesting about it here. So that's what we're gonna do. And then I'm also gonna show you guys a beautiful edition of Dracula that I own. I'm actually not one to normally collect editions because I find people who collect editions to be a little bit pretentious, but when I saw this one, it felt less like I was buying a book and more like I was buying a painting, you know? And you'll see why when I show you the edition. It won't take long, but I just want to share that with you guys because I think it's gorgeous. And then we are going to be reading an excerpt from a Bram Stoker story called The Shadow Builder. So that will be interesting. I have not read that yet. So you'll be getting my first impression of it. I don't believe it's a vampire story. I believe that Dracula was his only vampire story. But if it is, I'll be very happy. Finally, we're going to be reading two poems and one excerpt from Carmilla, because I feel like that would be topical. Also, before I start this video, truly, weird, I want to read a bit from the introduction of this poetry book of vampire poetry. It's called Vampires and the Shadow World, an anthology of classic poetry and stories, collected by Aurora Thorne, which I personally think is a very beautiful name. You know, it's like just like Aurora from the fairy tale, which was always one of my favorite Disney movies. Although, obviously, the first was Merida and Brave. That was my favorite Disney princess, favorite Disney movie. I watched that on repeat. But other than that, my favorite Disney movie was Sleeping Beauty. So, I think this is a very beautiful name, Aurora Thorne. If I could be named something other than Maxine, I think I'd want to be named Aurora Thorne. Anyway, I want to read this one bit from the introduction that relates to my goal in my research of vampires. I briefly touched on this in the last video. The reason I am researching vampires is because I'm writing an essay on vampirism and the evolution of vampirism and vampires in media, specifically in folklore, mythology, and popular culture, and how people's societal conditions, how the societal conditions of the people who connected to these stories enough to make them historically relevant or culturally relevant reflect the fears that they had. Like I think I kind of forgot my train of thought there. I may not have phrased that right, but I'll say it again. Basically how people's, like, what certain social conditions created what social condition, how the social conditions of the people who wrote the stories and enjoyed the stories is reflected in vampirism, and how in vampire stories, and how vampirism reflects the fears of the times and the social and like material conditions of the people. So I guess Mrs. Aurora Thorne, or Ms. Aurora Thorne phrases this better than I will in a more succinct manner. All these preternatural creatures are often reflections of their times, adapting to societal shifts and developments. During the Romantic era, they signified fear of industrialization and separation from nature, while contemporary literature explores existential themes such as identity, isolation, and immortality ethics. While I think that it's a little more complex than this, and I think that economic issues are also reflected in more contemporary vampire stories, I think this is definitely a very important quote. And I may make another video on Dracula and class. I may make a whole video on Dracula, or just ramble about Dracula. Again, not a video essay, just me rambling. I think I'm just gonna get into this. I've wasted enough of your time. So, without further ado, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. I'm not sure why I pronounce that like French. He's Irish. Is it the same pronunciation? I don't know. Anyway, Sheridan Le Fanu. So, just to recap what the plot of Carmilla is. Carmilla is about a girl named Laura who lives in an isolated schloss in Austria. Just to like tell you, I guess. A schloss is, oh my god, I have a pimple on my nose. I have a fucking pimple on my fucking nose. A schloss is a tiny castle. But it's called a schloss. Anyway, Laura lives in a schloss with her father. She does not have a strong female role model in her isolated life. It's just her father, and a few maids and servants, but no one with an important, like, no one with a authoritative role. There are no authoritative feminine roles in her life. which I feel like you could definitely say something like about how that makes it her more vulnerable to Carmilla's influence. Um, but I'll get into that. Carmilla um is this girl who um crashes in like a carriage crash on the Schloss property after Laura's potential friend, and I say potential because they never actually met, but she was very excited to meet this girl because she had never really connected to any other girls her own age. And she was excited when her father said, "Hey, my associate is staying with us in the Schloss, and he's bringing his young daughter who's about your age. You can connect." But when she finds out this girl has died, she's devastated. Carmilla crashes with her mother in a carriage on the Schloss property. And because the mother has somewhere to be, the Laura's family, they take Carmilla in. Carmilla and Laura develop a very, very codependent, tight relationship over a period of about 3 months, I believe. Um, but as their relationship develops and as Carmilla becomes more attached, Laura's health begins to dwindle. She begins to have like nightmarish dreams of having her blood sucked. She starts to notice like marks on her neck, and she becomes very anemic. I'm sure you can guess the trajectory in which this story is going. Um, it's quite obvious. There is no twist, so I'm not really like spoiling much for you here, but I will be spoiling a few interesting things when I do talk about the themes. Um, I am going to talk a bit about the themes just in Carmilla, not necessarily the ones that I am attaching to Dracula. I'm going to attach them to Dracula with further research, but right now I'm just rambling, you know? So something that I found very interesting was how, in Carmilla, and I'm just going to put a little, this is the time that you should skip to if you do not want spoilers for Carmilla. Just like more about the world building. But yeah, skip here if you don't want spoilers for the world building in Carmilla. Okay, so in Carmilla, Le Fanu borrows heavily from traditional, like mythological vampire folklore, and I'm talking like ancient, or not mythological folklore. Folklore and mythology are different things. He borrows heavily from ancient vampire lore, and like Eastern European lore, just like the classic, not necessarily literary vampires, the more like legendary vampires, you know? He borrows heavily from that transformation process, which I think is very interesting because the predecessor of Carmilla in the literary world would be that would be The Vampire by John Polidori. And yet in The Vampire by John Polidori, you do not get he doesn't borrow from this, like from the ancient vampire forms of like vampire transformation. But in Carmilla, Le Fanu writes that you can become a vampire by suicide, by bite, and I think by improper burial. These are all things that can turn you into a vampire in ancient vampire stories. An example of this is the Mesopotamian Ikimu, which was a corpse that was improperly buried, and was because they could not enter a hell, or they could not enter the underworld. They were forced to roam the world forever, usually latching on to someone they knew, typically a family member, and draining their life force. I mentioned the aspect about the family members because here, and if you're like staying because you didn't care about the world building spoiler, I'd skip here because this is like big spoiler. But yeah, in Carmilla, it's revealed that Laura is actually a descendant of Carmilla. Sorry if I'm blinking weird. It's because my contact is fucked. Anyway, it's revealed that Laura is actually a descendant of Carmilla, and that's why Carmilla attached herself so heavily to Laura. Um, and the thing is, Carmilla's attachment is very sexual. It is very romantic. Like they kiss, she confesses her love for her. Like it is definitely romantic. It is definitely lesbian. And like we're talking even in an era where it was very normalized for women to have like sexual and romantic relationships with their female friends as long as they weren't getting married because it was considered like practice. There's a name for that, but I forget, but it is, you can Google it. Anyway, uh so I find this interesting because it is just like another example of vampires representing fears of sexual deviance and perversion. Um and also the ways in which this was associated with queerness. Dracula by Bram Stoker. I feel, oh, you saw my leg. Scandalous. I feel like it is very difficult. I'm gonna paint my nails red, like blood. I feel like it is actually, despite Carmilla being slightly more obscure than Dracula, I feel like it is more easy to infer the plot of Carmilla than it is Dracula, just because Dracula has been so misrepresented in the media for like ever. Like, I still don't think there has been a single good Dracula adaptation that has like called itself Dracula. I think that there are many good adaptations that have not called themselves Dracula though. And when I say that, I mean specifically Nosferatu. Obviously. Like there are so many other people who have like discussed this at length, how Nosferatu is a much better adaptation of Dracula than anything like Coppola or Luc Benson can do. I mean, man, that guy's weird. Anyway, this is so pretty. Anyway, it's easier to infer the plot of Carmilla than it is Dracula because Dracula has been so misrepresented, is what I'm saying. So I am actually going to just generally cover the plot of Dracula, even if you like don't think that it would be necessary. Like if you're like a vampire layman and you've not read Dracula, I feel like you wouldn't know the plot of Dracula. But yeah. So basically, Dracula is about this young man who visits this castle in Castle Dracula in the Carpathian Mountains in Transylvania. And he discovers that the man who he has been assigned to find a house for in London is actually a vampire. That is Dracula. That is Count Dracula. And Count Dracula, ends up trying to like go to areas of Western Europe, specifically London, and trying to terrorize the villagers or terrorize the Londoners, the poor English, and spread vampirism and terror and his complete domination over everyone. And it is up to this man, Jonathan Harker, his wife, Mina Harker, Mina's friend, Lucy, Arthur, I forget his last name. Honestly, I was reading, he was just some guy. there's this other guy. Fuck. Yeah, Dr. Stewart. And finally, everyone's favorite, Van Helsing. Dr. Van Helsing. It is up to this... Oh, also, how could I forget? Oh my god. Oh my god. And I forget his name too. But he's the best. Oh my god, I forget his name, but there's a cowboy. There's a cowboy in this book. And everyone leaves that out. They leave out the fact that there's a fucking cowboy, and he's the funniest character ever. He's the best. And they leave him out. Oh, Quincy Morris. Oh my god, Quincy Morris. Wow. He's really the best. I'm so sad I forgot his name. It's been a while since I've read this, though, in my defense. So it's up to this little Scooby gang to defeat Dracula, kick him out of London, and kill him once and for all. You know? It is, when I say Scooby gang, I mean that, like, very, very, like, I'm not exaggerating at all. Like, this is literally just, like, Victorian Scooby-Doo. Except there actually is a monster. The monster is feudalism. But I'm not gonna, because I do want to discuss, vampirism and class, specifically in Dracula. I think I want to do that in another video, because it's a very interesting subject, and there are a lot of elements of class in Dracula. So, both of these books, Carmilla and its protege, Dracula, explore themes of corrupted Madonnas, like corrupted women, the corrupted Madonna, the corrupted, boyish heterosexual, and, they also both explore the idea of a perverse, predatory, selfish love. Now, the love is actually, in both of these cases, the love is not a heterosexual one, despite what the media will lead you to believe. Don't believe the fake news, okay? Mina and Dracula are absolutely, like, not, there is no love there whatsoever. If anything, it's more of a rape allegory with Mina. And, but, like, if there is going to be any romance, like, any sort of, like, Carmilla and Laura-esque romance, it would be, you would find it with Dracula and Jonathan. I'd also like to discuss, one part of this whole exploration of Dracula needs to be, like, you cannot... Fuck off. Another theme that I do want to discuss in relation to Dracula and Bram Stoker is, and like when we're going to be discussing queerness, this whole video is about vampirism and queerness. An unavoidable thing to mention is Bram Stoker's own relation to queerness and queer identity, and how queerness was perceived, especially at the time of its publication. Like, right before it was being published, a little unknown author by the name of Oscar Wilde was on trial for being, gay. He was on trial for being gay. And the thing is, Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde were actually college friends. Like, they were very close. I'm pretty sure Bram Stoker actually stole Oscar Wilde's or Oscar Wilde stole Bram Stoker's girlfriend. Yeah, that's how it is. Oscar Wilde stole Bram Stoker's girlfriend. But they were very, very close. So, and there's like a lot of, there's also like, there's this one letter that, Bram Stoker wrote to this other guy who I'm pretty sure, hold up, let me Google this, I forget his name, but I know that he is quite famous. Hold up. I knew it. Yeah. So he wrote, you probably heard of him, Walt Whitman. Not Oscar Wilde. Bram Stoker wrote Walt Whitman, like young Bram Stoker wrote Walt Whitman a very homoerotic fan letter. It was basically a love letter. He wrote Walt Whitman, homoromantic, I should say. Homoromantic love letter. And he kept that on his desk for 4 years before he sent it. So, like you can read the letter. I'm pretty sure Walt Whitman himself was involved in some, like, homosexual speculation scandals, but you can do your own research on that. The point is, Oscar Wilde, whether or not he was queer himself, had a lot of connections to queer authors and queer literature at the time. And while Oscar Wilde was on trial, after the Oscar Wilde trials and Oscar Wilde was sentenced to a word count, Bram Stoker was inspired. He started writing Dracula. Now whether I believe, it is my belief that he read Carmilla, and because Bram Stoker at the end of his he was not very accepting of queerness. He was homophobic. I should say he was a homophobic guy. And you can you can read about this. Like, he's not said his outward beliefs were not pro-gay. But this thing with Oscar Wilde, who he knew and he was very close with, affected him very deeply. It is my belief that Carmilla's undertones of a corrupted innocence and corrupted Madonna, and like a cautionary tale behind homosexuality was a big aspect of what inspired Bram Stoker to write Dracula and write Count Dracula and Jonathan the way that he did. And I will get into that now. I'm back. It is the next day, which is why I'm dressed up. I just got back from school. So in this section, we are going to be discussing a few themes that are in the themes that interest me the most about Dracula and Carmilla, and how they mirror each other, and how the Bram Stoker's circumstances in the Oscar Wilde trials sort of elaborated more on the idea of the corrupted Madonna explored in Carmilla. So in Carmilla, Laura is the quintessential Madonna. She's virginal, she's isolated, she's blonde. So, we got a little bit of like the Eurocentric beauty standards, and or not Eurocentric, but like white beauty standards specifically. And there is a lot to be said for Dracula and vampires, and how their portrayal reflects fears of Eastern European immigration, especially when you look at the whole plot of Dracula, this Eastern European guy, with a feudal title, moving to capitalist London, and because this is and it was very interesting because this was 1896 is a height of industrialization. Keep in mind, Eastern Europe has not industrialized yet. That which is what caused the Russian Revolution in 1917. I believe it was 1904. Anyway, but yeah, that's what caused the October Revolution. But I'm getting off track. I'd love to discuss that further, the comparisons between Dracula and the ever-present class struggle as sort of an immortal issue within human society. And there's this one quote in Dracula in the early stages that I think exactly mirrors a Karl Marx quote from the beginning of the Communist Manifesto. I think that would be really interesting to explore in another video. But I won't do that here. I'll refrain from yapping further about that. But I will discuss a few of these interesting themes that I found. So, Carmilla is a corrupting force with Laura. She corrupts Laura through her homosexual advances towards her. She feeds off of her, and it is like vampirism is sort of like a parasite. It's like an infectious thing. It is parasitic in many stories. So there's also the theme of selfish and predatory love, and how these are the sort of things that vampirism is associated with even today. And that's one of the main things that they explore, selfish, predatory love. And there are a few quotes where Carmilla explicitly states her toxic, predatory love. And this is how homosexuality was viewed, especially post Oscar Wilde trials in England. But this is before that. But I think that makes sense as to why Bram Stoker would be inspired by Carmilla, post trials, because it did talk a lot about how about this idea of homosexual love as a toxic and parasitic thing, because that's how it was viewed. One sec. I will find the quote. Here's one. I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so. Carmilla says that to Laura. And then here's the one I wanted to discuss. And this is what I think really encapsulates how homosexual love was viewed by both of these authors, and how this further influenced the homosexual themes in a lot of contemporary, modern vampire books. You will think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. So the idea of gay and queer love as a selfish and perverted thing, dragging these Madonna women under, is a theme that is definitely played upon further in Dracula, though it is less lesbian coded. But you could discuss the queer interpretations of Mina and Lucy's relationship. I personally don't think they were intended that way, but I definitely do read them that way. Death and the Author and such. Just because I'm gay. I definitely do have Mina Harker / Lucy Westenra.
Whether you're relaxing at home or out and about, make your music move with
Fuck off! Good Christ. I definitely do have Mina Harker / Lucy Westenra saved on my AO3 tab. So, if you guys got any good fic recs for them, let me know, because they are they're so cute. I love them so much. Sorry. The vampire Yuri demons are possessing me. Anyway, Dracula plays a lot on this as well. And like I said, I definitely do think that this portrayal of homosexual love is a parasitic and unhealthy and selfish thing was something that really got to Bram Stoker, because he wrote Dracula, like, I think, like, maybe 3 months after Oscar Wilde was sentenced. There's a sticker in my fucking leggings. Anyway, so Oscar Wilde had an affinity for young boys, and I won't, like, glaze him too hard. He liked teenagers. He liked 14-year-old boys. But he also, like, just generally enjoyed, like, Twinkie men, for, you know, lack of a more flowery term. He liked twinks. He loved twinks. And he actually went to jail because the father of the twink he was in love with, who was of age, sent him a letter and was like, "Stop fucking my son!" And he was like, "I'm gonna take you to court. You're going to court with me." And because the son was like, "Oh my god, you gotta take my dad to court. We can get, like, so much money. You gotta take my dad to court. You gotta prove your love for me. You gotta take my dad to court." And Oscar Wilde was like, "All right, fine, whatever you say, baby girl." And they took him to court, and Oscar Wilde lost because his argument was, I'm not gay. And, like, that's just a straight up lie. Oscar Wilde had so many people who were like, "Yeah, that bitch is gay. That guy is so fucking gay. He's so fucking gay." So, like, it was really hard for him to say, "I'm not gay," on a stand under, like, intense scrutiny, when there's, like, a whole lineup of, like, people who are gonna be like, "Nah, I saw him kissing a man. I saw him on a date with that twink." So, anyway, I'm getting off track again. I'm sorry. But yeah, Jonathan in Dracula, sort of, he's not very young, but he's young enough, and he has that sort of, like, innocent, boyish demeanor about him. He's very, like, easily startled. He's sort of, like, sheltered. He's one of my favorites. That's, like, my type. I sort of imagine him as, like, kind of a, like, David Tennant-y, like, young David Tennant-y vibe, you know? That's just because I have a huge crush on David Tennant. Oh my god. He's so fine. He's so fine. I'm sorry, David Tennant, and your lovely wife. You guys are amazing and gorgeous. I'm sorry, David Tennant. Anyway, but yeah, he has that sort of, like, innocent, boyish demeanor about him, but he's heterosexual. And he is engaged to Mina on his first visit to Castle Dracula. So, like, Dracula is, like, totally in love with Jonathan. And when I say in love, I'm not, like, just being like, oh, he just wants to fuck him. Because I think there's, like, I think, like, Dracula, like, genuinely was in love with Jonathan. If you read the book, I will find a few quotes. Like, for example, in chapter 4, Count Dracula carries Jonathan to his bed. He makes his bed. He undresses Jonathan, and then doesn't take any of his shit, like, from his pockets. So he was just doing it for the love of the game. He says to him, "Your letters are sacred to me." He sits beside him. "The Count has come. He sat down beside me and said in his smoothest voice as he opened the 2 letters, etc., 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 "Your letters are sacred to me." "The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me with a red light of triumph in his eyes and with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of." So this line, there's a whole thing of, like, the Judas, the comparison to Judas draws me in here because, and I wrote that here, Judas kiss. Judas kisses Jesus as his way to identify him to the Roman police, who then crucify him. This sort of idea of love as damnation is a theme that is like so prominent in vampire books, and I think the way that it is connected to queerness, especially when you look at the historical context between Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde, is very, very telling to me. You know, like the idea that you would be damned for loving someone, and that queer love is a selfish, ardent, like parasitic desire that damns you, and yet it is loving. I think that is why there is so much queerness in vampire literature. Another one is when the biggest sign that Dracula has a big old crush on Jonathan and that he's like actually in love with him is when he straight up says it in the book. And I will read you these lines. How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him when I have forbidden it? This man belongs to me. You yourself never love. You never love. And this is what the women who live with him, as people on Tumblr have called him, his 3 lesbian roommates, Dracula's 3 lesbian roommates, are telling him, because they've started to seduce Jonathan. And they're three vampire women referred to as the Weird Sisters, which is very interesting. And it's actually why I started reading Hamlet, because I do want to like do another like comparison between Hamlet and vampires and like witches, and how like monstrous creatures in literature and in media have sort of gone from being sort of interchangeable towards being their own separate creatures that are very easily identifiable as like, you know, our like Warner Bros. I think that's Warner Bros. Like the Warner Monsters. It might be a different media company that did those. I forget the name, but you know what I'm talking about. Like those like 1930s movies where it'd be like the blood of Dracula, or like no, like the blood of, I don't know, Dracula's daughter, or like Frankenstein, or like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then it'd be like a bunch of spin-offs, like the, you know, your Hammersmith films. But yeah, so he says, the women, they say to him, you yourself never loved. You never loved. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned after looking at my face attentively and said in a soft whisper, yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. So these are his wives, and that's how they're referred to, Dracula's brides. You probably heard about that. I think there's a whole movie on it. But he doesn't actually seem to get along with them very much, so I'm not sure why they're depicted as his brides, but I think they are his brides. Like, they're like, not exactly his ex, I think they're just more his ex-wives. Like, it's not Dracula's wives, it's Dracula's ex-wives that he's too broke to move out of the house with, so he lives with them. But yeah, he turns to him, looks at his face attentively, and says, yes, I too can love. In reference to, like, saying that, and saying that these women would know that he can love because he loved them. Therefore, he's saying that Jonathan is his wife. Like, I'm sorry. But he also, like, and like the idea that you can, prey on someone and want to, like, drink their blood, I think Dracula drinks, Jonathan's blood. Dracula drinks Jonathan's blood. And in the book, blood transfusion is stated explicitly to be akin to marriage. It gets to the point where when Dracula, and spoilers for Dracula, so here, skip to this if you don't want to hear that. When Dracula drinks the blood of Lucy, it's depicted, it's said to be like he is wedding Lucy. And then, when Arthur, Lucy's husband, transfuses the blood to Lucy, he says it is more like marriage than any sort of wedding they could have done. And they're actually engaged. I think they're married. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've read this. But that again, that sort of idea of like blood transfusion being being akin to like a dark satanic marriage is very present. And so when there is that transfusion of blood between Jonathan and Dracula, it is essentially like Dracula is making Jonathan his wife, or his husband, I guess, but I think wife is funnier. So I'm gonna say Jonathan is Dracula's male wife. Yeah, so there's that, and this sort of like, so that's my interpretation of how the idea of like the Madonna being corrupted in Carmilla and the sort of young boy being corrupted in Dracula relate to each other, and Oscar Wilde. But there's another theme that I wanted to touch on about the like explicit like Madonna and like the Madonna complex and like the virtuous woman versus like the like easily tempted woman, like the Eve versus I don't know, the Virgin Mary. You know, Eve was tempted, Mina was not. That sort of thing. I'm gonna touch on that just now. Okay, sorry, I'm back. Some bullshit just happened. Some really weird bullshit. But that's not about vampires. So, we're gonna ignore the weird, insane bullshit that just happened. I gotta fix the camera angle. Fuck me. Okay, so, the discussion about Mina and Lucy and, like, the corruption of the Madonna through vampirism that is explored in Carmilla, and how this is more directly explored in Dracula. So Mina as a character is a very independent person. She's very I wouldn't say conservative, because despite being written by somebody from the Victorian era, the writing of the women is very dynamic and very realistic. And there's actually, like, one of my favorite parts of Dracula is how it actually critiques women being infantilized. Like, for, like, again, this whole section is really just going to be spoilers for Dracula. So if you don't want to have Dracula spoiled for you, I suggest skipping here. Okay? We're good? All right. So in Dracula, when Mina gets attacked by Dracula in what is essentially a metaphoric rape scene. This happens because she was forced to stay at home while the other men set up traps and stuff to lure out Dracula and kill him. And Mina, consequently, was left alone in her house with Jonathan, but Jonathan's asleep. And actually, you could talk a little bit about that, how, like, Mina and Jonathan's sort of, like, the way Jonathan sort of represents the boyish, heterosexual that gets, you know, exploited by the pervert homosexual. And, like, how he is considered vulnerable at the same time as Mina. When Mina goes through what is essentially a rape scene. But yeah, so Mina is left alone, and so Dracula attacks Mina in what is essentially a rape scene. And this is because it is explicitly stated within the text that this is because Mina was underestimated and infantilized by the group, and that they are stronger as a group together when all their weight is pulled together. Like, which I really appreciate that, because that is a very novel thing for a female character, even with contemporary characterizations of women, but especially for Victorian characterization. But yeah, so she is a very independent, sort of like, she's very competent. She is not, I would not say she is the perfect Madonna, but I would say she is more a virtuous woman. So, while Mina is sort of this, like, incorruptible, virtuous woman, Lucy is also very virtuous in the book, despite being depicted as being sort of like a coquettish flirt, being more like the whore to Mina's Madonna. This is not actually an accurate portrayal of her as a character. She much more fits the Madonna archetype than the whore archetype, though she does have a lot of men who are attracted to her. And I guess this is what could be, like, this is another sort of aspect of, like, that whole sexuality corrupting women fear that's going on in both of these books. Like, her having so many men be attracted to her, and her having so much, like, being a very, like a force, like a person who many men find attractive, sort of being like a cautionary tale, like, this could happen to her, she could become a vampire, because she does become a vampire at the end before she's killed by Arthur, which is, it's a very sad scene. But so she's sort of like, this could also like this could also be another aspect of it, the fact that, like, she has so much more male attention going on for her, and the idea that being surrounded by that male attention could potentially make her more vulnerable to corruption from an evil sexual force. But that's not what I mainly want to discuss. It's also like the warning behind what Bram Stoker is writing, and the way that plays into, like, gender roles and and sexual confines for women, especially in the Victorian times. So Mina does end up getting bitten and almost turns into a vampire. Lucy does. She's the more innocent force. She's the more innocent, not force, but she's more innocent of the two, and it's sort of like she did not have the virtue or the, like, will to refuse the sexual lure of vampirism. And that's, like, she's the cautionary tale, and Mina sort of being the more virtuous woman, not the more virtuous woman, but the woman with the more know-how to resist sexual corruption, means that she gets to live in the story. And there's, like, a lot you could, like there's a lot I draw from that, like, how women experiencing sexuality was, and, like, having a sexual awakening was treated as this sort of, like, demonic, satanic.
Lean into the sounds you love.
Oh my
Take your
god,
place.
fuck off, Spotify. Leave me alone. How this could, like, how a woman having a sexual awakening was treated as some kind of, like, evil, satanic thing that corrupted a woman and would, like, damn her, you know? And how these women need to be eliminated. How these women should be, killed. Like, or, like, gotten rid of from society. And how, like, it does have an empathetic approach to it, but at the end of the day, they do end up killing Lucy. She is killed by her own husband, nonetheless. Whereas Mina, who refutes the sexual lure, the dark sexual deviance of Dracula, is the virtuous woman who gets to live. That is something I find very interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to show you my favorite edition of Dracula. Well, I hate to say it's my favorite, because I do definitely think it's the prettiest, but I feel like there's always a personal connection you have to the very first edition of a book you read. Like, I had this one edition of the Bell Jar, and it was so beautiful, and I bought it on my own, which is, like, that doesn't sound very, novel for anyone else, but when you're a teenager, that's pretty cool. Like, it was, like, from my own money. I got my own money, and I bought my own book, So I lent it to this girl, and I hope she has it. I hope she read it, because I loved that book. It was just such a vibe. Anyway, I'm getting off track. But yeah, I feel like there's always a connection you have to the very first edition of a book you read, especially if you annotate it. And I did annotate Dracula. And I might use my annotations to make another video essay, especially on Dracula, because Dracula is such a complex piece of literature and so influential, especially in the vampire genre. So if I keep making these videos, I think I might make one on Dracula using my annotations. But this is, aesthetically, this is my favorite edition of Dracula. It's a watercolor cover, and it has this gorgeous back that is ruined by this barcode, which I will cover because I don't want to destroy the illusion for you. But there you go. I think this is supposed to be Lucy. I always imagine Lucy as being brunette, like having like gorgeous like flowing locks, and then like Mina would have like a Jane Goodall blonde hair, like in a bun, and she had like a pencil or something, you know? Anyway, I think that's Lucy. Gorgeous, right? And I love the writing there, and just the way he's drawn, like the slight hairiness of his chest, giving him sort of an animalistic quality, and like sort of like an animalistic sexual quality. Like you can like infer that he's naked, and I like that. I like that whole like aspect of the vampirism of it all. I like the way it's sort of like a sunset too, because like actually in the first depiction of vampires dying in the sun is in Nosferatu. That is the only time that has ever been a thing. Though vampires have often been associated with like have often been affected by the sun. And I do have a bit of a theory on this, because there are a lot of like ancient desert monsters that bear striking similarity to the modern vampire, and like, you know, the desert is very hot, so like if you died in a desert, you might come back and become a vampire. So I don't know, there's a connection there. Maybe it's been like broken telephone through time. But yeah, anyway, I like that because in Dracula he loses his ability to change form and use his powers when the sun rises. Did I say sunset then? I meant sunrise. Or it could also be a sunset, because then this is like when he's transforming into a bat. I also like the way the ropiness of the title, that looks like blood curdling, also reminds you of like a dragon breathing fire, and that like goes back to the whole meaning of Dracula being like the dragon, like the house of dragon or whatever. Anyway, yeah, I really do like this edition. I like all the bats on it. Here's the inside. I'm afraid to damage it. But here you go. God, isn't that gorgeous? There is this beautiful scene in Dracula where Jonathan is looking out the window and he sees 3 bats. And he knows that they're the 3 vampire women who Dracula lives with. And it's just such a visually compelling scene to read. Like the first few chapters of Dracula are some of the best like moments in Gothic fiction ever, I'd argue. But yeah, this is the inside, and this is a little drawing done here for the introduction. I like the way the pages are like sort of, I forget what this is called, but it fits the aesthetic. Aesthetically, I like it. Practically, I don't, because it's like hard to like find your page. I think so many people complain about that. But anyway, and then here in the inside, there are 2 women, presumably vampires. They could either be Lucy and Mina, which I think is the most likely, or they could be 2 of the vampire women. But I'd say they're probably Lucy and Mina, because the vampire women are often depicted as the 3 of them. Anyway, it's by an artist, a Cuban artist named Ruben Toledo. So I really like his work, and you should probably look at some of it. Look at the inside of that. Look at the print on that Bram Stoker. It's so beautiful. So, now that we're done.
Want to spice up your listening?
No, I don't want to spice up my listening. Can you eat my fucking ass? Sorry. Now that we're done with that, I would like to read, blind, mind you, this is just what I am going to be reading, a short story by Bram Stoker called The Shadow Builder. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from it, and I am going into this blind. So you have about as much knowledge of this story as I do when I'm reading it. So this was published 1881, and here we go. The lonely shadow builder watches ever in his lonely abode. The walls are of cloud and round, and through them changing ever as they come, past the dim shades of all the things that have been. This endless shadowy wheeling, moving circle is called the procession of the dead past. And it's got like a little pretty font for that. In it, everything is just as it has been in the great world. There is no change in any part, for each moment as it passes sends its shade into this dim procession. Here there are moving people and events, cares, thoughts, follies, crimes, joys, sorrows, places, scenes, hopes and fears, and all that make the sum of life with all its lights and shadows. Every picture in nature where shadow dwells, and that is every one, has here its dim phantom. Here are all pictures that are most fair and most sad to see. The passing gloom over a sunny cornfield, when with the breeze comes the dark sway of the full ears as they bend and rise, the ripple on the glassy surface of a summer sea, the dark expanse that lies beyond and without the broad track of moonlight on the water, the lacework of glare and gloom that flickers over the road as one passes in autumn when the moonlight is falling through the naked branches of overhanging trees, the cool, restful shade under the thick trees in summertime when the sun is flaming down on the haymaker at work, the dark clouds that flit across the moon hiding her light, which leaps out again hollowly and coldly, the gloom of violet and black that rises on the horizon when rain is near in summertime. The dark recesses and gloomy caverns where the waterfalls hurl itself shrieking into the pool below. All these shadow pictures, and 1,000 others that come by night and day, circle in the procession among the things that have been. Here, too, every act that any human being does, every thought, good and bad, every wish, every hope, everything that is secret, is pictured and becomes a lasting record which cannot be blotted out. For any time, the shadow builder may summon with his spectral hand any one, sleeping or waking, to behold what is pictured of the dead past in the dim, mysterious distance which encompasses his lonely abode. In this ever-moving procession of the dead past, there is but one place where the circling phantoms are not, and where the cloudy walls are lost. There is here a great blackness, dense and deep and full of gloom, and behind which lies the great real world without. This blackness is called the Gate of Dread. The procession afar off takes from it its course, and when passing on its way, it circles again towards the darkness. The shadowy phantoms melt again into the mysterious gloom. Sometimes the shadow builder passes through the vapory walls of his abode and mingles in the ranks of the procession, and sometimes a figure summoned by the wave of his spectral hand, with silent footfall, stalks out of the mist and pauses beside him. Sometimes from a sleeping body the shadow builder summons a dreaming soul. Then for a time the quick and the dead stand face to face, and men call it a dream of the past. When this happens, friend meets friend, or foe meets foe, and over the soul of the dreamer comes a happy memory long vanished, or the troubled agony of remorse. But no spectre passes through the misty wave save to the shadow builder alone, and no human being, even in a dream, can enter the dimness where the procession moves along. So lives the lonely shadow builder amid his gloom, and his habitation is peopled by a spectral past. His only people are of the past, for though he creates shadows, they dwell not with him. His children go out at once to their homes in the big world, and he does not know them more till, in the fullness of time, they join the procession of the dead past, and reach, in turn, the misty walls of his home. For the shadow builder, there is not night nor day, nor season of the year, but forever round his lonely dwelling passes the silent procession of the dead past. Sometimes he sits and muses with eyes fixed and staring, and seeing nothing. And then out at sea there is a cloudless calm or the black gloom of night. Towards the far north or south for long months together he never looks, and then the stillness of the Arctic night reigns alone. When the dreamy eyes again become conscious, the hard silence softens into the sounds of life and light. Sometimes, with set frown on his face, and a hard look in his eyes, which flash and gleam dark lightnings, the shadow builder sways resolute to his task, and round the world of the shadows troop thick and fast. Over the thick sea sweeps the blackness of the tempest. The dim lights flicker in the cots away upon the lonely moors, and even in the palaces of kings dark shadows pass and fly and glide over all things. Yea, through the hearts of the kings themselves, for the shadow builder is then dread to look upon. Now and then, with long whiles between, the shadow builder, as he completes his task, lingers over the work as though he loves it. His heart yearns for the children of his will, and he fain would keep even one shadow to be a companion to him in his loneliness. But the voice of the great present is ever ringing in his ears, and at such times, enjoining him to haste, the giant voice booms out, "Onwards, onwards!" Whilst the words ring in the ears of the shadow builder, the completed shadow fades from underneath his hands, and passing unseen through the gate of dread, mingles in the great world without, in which it is to play its part. When, in the fullness of time, this shadow comes into the ranks of the procession of the dead past, the shadow builder knows it and remembers it. But in his dead heart there is no gleam of loving remembrance, for he can only love the present, that slips ever from his grasp. And oh, it is a lonely life which the shadow builder lives, and in the weird, sad, solemn, mysterious, silent gloom which encompasses him, he toils on ever at his lonely task. But sometimes, too, the shadow builder has his joys. Baby shadows spring up, and sunny pictures alight with sweetness and love glide from under his touch and are gone. Before the shadow builder at his task lies a space wherein is neither light nor darkness, neither joy nor gloom. Did I say that right? I'm going to repeat that. Before the shadow builder at his task lies a space wherein is neither light or darkness, neither joy nor gloom. Whatsoever touches it fades away as sand heaps melt before the incoming tide, or like words write on water. It is not all things lose their being and become part of the great, is not. Oh, no. In it, all things lose their being and become part of the great is not. And this terrible line of mystery is called the threshold. Whatsoever passes into it disappears, and whatsoever emerges from it is complete as it comes and passes into the great world as a thing to run its course. Before the threshold, the shadow builder himself is as naught, and in its absorbing might there is that which he cannot sway or rule. When at his task he summons, and out of the impalpable nothingness of the threshold there comes the object of his will. Sometimes the shadow bursts full and freshly, and is suddenly lost in the gloom of the gate of dread, and sometimes it grows softly and faintly, getting fuller as it comes out, and so melts away into the gloom. that is the first part of The Shadow Builder by Bram Stoker. I really like that. I think that is really gorgeous. I think that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Like, I'm definitely gonna read that. I'm definitely gonna read this book. Bram Stoker, wow. Christina Rossetti. I can't wait to get to Christina Rossetti because we're doing poetry soon. That's what we're gonna do now, right after I crack my back. Ugh. Oh God, Jesus! Did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear that? That was like unearthly. My God. Anyway, we're now going to be reading 2 poems from this poetry book about vampirism. One of them by my favorite poet, Christina Rossetti, and the other one by John Keats. And then finally, we're going to read an excerpt from Carmilla that is in this book. I've actually already read this poem, The World, by Christina Rossetti, because I've read a whole book of Christina Rossetti's poetry, because I can't get enough of her. Like, I know I said earlier that I find reading books of poetry to be very difficult, but I'm gonna make an exception for Christina Rossetti because I just she's just something else, you know? So here it is. The World by Christina Rossetti. By day she woos me, soft, exceeding fair, but all night as the moon so changeth she, loathsome and foul with hideous leprosy, and subtle serpents gliding in her hair. By day she woos me to the outer air, ripe fruits, sweet flowers, and full satiety, but through the night a beast she grins at me, a very monster void of love and prayer. By day she stands a lie, by night she stands in all the naked horror of the truth, with pushing horns and clawed and clutching hands. Is this a friend indeed, that I should sell my soul to her, give her my life and youth, till my feet cloven too take hold on hell? What an amazing woman. I don't know anything about her personal life. I know a little bit. There was a bit of a biography on her at the beginning of the book. I was reading the anthology of her work, but from what I've read of her poetry, she just seems like a beautiful soul who really did understand like the complexity of human life. And I did like the aspects of this vampire poem that touch on leprosy, i.e. the whole thing with vampirism and illness, which I was touching on earlier, and how, like, I believe it was the Catholic Church, and I believe it was Eastern Europe. I'm not sure, though. I'd have to reread this nonfiction book on vampire history that I have to confirm that. But I do know that there was, like, religious bodies, and they would send out vampire hunters to plague-ridden towns. And they would just, like, kill vampires. It would just be, like, random women and dead bodies. They would just stake dead bodies. I think I've already discussed that, like the whole thing with Liver Mortis. Yeah, I have. I also like the aspect of the serpent in her hair, which is like, yes, that is obviously about Medusa, but it's also very interesting when you think about like how ancient vampire lore has like in so many of these ancient vampires, these women are like half serpent or like part serpent. Like they'll have some kind of serpent aspect to them. And I find that interesting. I also find like the whole fact that they're cold-blooded, and they're sort of like, they have like reptiles, they have like 2 eyes, so they look human, but they're not necessarily, but they're uncanny. Like you would notice if you know the difference between a lizard and a person, like a baby. Like if I gave you a baby and a lizard, you'd know which one was the baby and which one was the lizard, obviously. But yeah, I find that interesting. And that's also a part of the second poem, which I'm going to read you. Limea by John Keats. Limea is actually an ancient Greek tale, and there are like the Limei, which are Limea's children, similar to Lilith in that sense. Yeah, so she was and I'm gonna read what I wrote here. Limea, a queen of Libya who was granted the ability to pluck out people's eyes and replace them by Zeus in exchange for sex. She gave birth to many children. Hera discovered the affair and, enraged, killed all of the children that were conceived from it and cursed Limea to only give birth to stillborn infants. Limea retreated to a cave where she could not revenge herself upon Hera, and took out her anger on children by drinking their blood and thus becoming an Empusai and giving birth to many demoness daughters. I think the thing is, like, Limea are like a subsect of the Empusai. Both of them are like vampiric ancient Greek myths. But yeah, there you go. That's Limea. And this is a poem by John Keats. Not about the Limei, about Limea. So presumably this is about the actual legend of Limea. Left to herself, the serpent now began to change. Her elfin blood in madness ran. Her mouth foamed, and the grass, wherewith besprent, withered at dew so sweet and virulent. Her eyes in torture fixed, and anguish drear, hot, glazed, and wide, with lid lashes all sere, flashed phosphor and sharp sparks, without one cooling tear. The colors all inflamed throughout her train. She writhed about, convulsed with scarlet pain. A deep Vulcanian yellow took the place of all her milder mooned body's grace. And as the lava ravishes the mead, spoiled all her silver mail and golden breed, made gloom of all her frecklings, streaks, and bars, eclipsed her crescents and licked up her stars, so that in moments few she was undressed of all her sapphires, greens, and amethyst, and rubious argent. Of all these bereft, nothing but pain and ugliness were left. So I think this is about her transformation from the beautiful woman to the vampire-esque creature that we know of her as now. Yeah. Finally, we're going to be reading an excerpt from Carmilla. From this same book. I could read you directly from the other one, but I don't want to do that. So, and this is my channel, so fuck off. Actually, I think I'm going to do two things. If they have the Bram Stoker short story, they don't. Not in here. So yeah, we're just going to be reading the Carmilla excerpt. And I think we've had enough of Bram Stoker for today. So a little focus on Carmilla couldn't hurt. So, without further ado, this is the first part of Carmilla. By Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. In Styria, we, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a castle or schloss. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. 800 or 900 a year does wonders. Scantily enough, ours would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, but I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place where everything is so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all materially add to our comforts or even luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service and retired upon a pension and his patrimony and purchased this feudal residence and the small estate on which it stands. A bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat, stocked with perch and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface white fleets of water lilies. Over all this, the Schloss shows its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I say the truth. Looking for the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. The nearest inhabited schloss of any historic association is that of old General Spieldorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. I have said the nearest inhabited village, because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say in the direction of General Spieldorf's Schloss, a ruined village, with its quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are the mouldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein, now extinct, who once owned the equally desolate chateau, which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the building attached to the Schloss. Listen and wonder. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19. 8 years have passed since then. Since. I and my father constituted the family at the Schloss. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess, who had been with me from, I might almost say, my infancy. I could not remember the time when her fat, benignant face was not a familiar picture in my memory. This was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me the loss of my mother, whom I do not even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our dinner party. There was a fourth, Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, a lady such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and her broken English, to which my father and I added English, which partly to prevent it becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a babel at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. And there were 2 or 3 young lady friends besides, pretty nearly of my own age, who were occasional visitors for longer or shorter terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. There were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you. My gouvernante had just so much control over me you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which in fact never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, was a large room in the upper story of the castle, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old, when one night I awoke, and looking round the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, or of fairy tales, and of ghost stories, of fairy tales, and of all such lore that makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall nearer to our faces. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper, preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when, to my surprise, I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. It was that of a young lady, who was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder, and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands, and lay down beside me on the bed, and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed, and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The lady started back, and her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor, and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story, they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with an unwonted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed, and about the room, and peep under tables, and pluck open cupboards. And the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hands along the hollow of the bed. Someone did lie there. So sure as you did not, the place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all 3 examining my chest where I told them I felt the punctures, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible of any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the 2 other servants, who were in charge of the nursery, remained sitting up all night, and from that time a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. How well I remember his long, saturnine face, slightly pitted with smallpox, and his chestnut wig. For a good while, every second day, he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror, and could not bear to be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully, and asking the nurse a number of questions, and laughing very heartily at one of the answers, and patting me on the shoulder and kissing me, and telling me not to be frightened, that it was nothing but a dream and could not hurt me. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and I was awfully frightened. I was a little consoled by the nursery maids assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me, and lain down beside the bed, and that I must have been half dreaming, not to have known her face. But this, though supported by the nurse, did not quite satisfy me. I remember, in the course of that day, a venerable old man in a black haysock coming into the room with the nurse and housekeeper, and talking a little to them, and very kindly to me. His face was very sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray, and joined my hands together, and desired me to say softly while they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers from us for Jesus' sake." I think these were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself, and my nurse used to for years make me say them in my prayers. I remember so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black haysock, as he stood in that rude, lofty brown room, with the clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering its shadowy atmosphere through the small lattice. He kneeled, and the 3 women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for what appeared to me a long time. I forget all my life preceding that event, and for some time after it is all obscured. It is all obscured also, but the scenes I have just described stand out vividly as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. That is the beginning of Carmilla. You will notice that there is, again, another theme of perversion of this grown woman biting this child on the chest. That is perverted, and it is gross, and it is very vampiric, and it very much is like another theme of how vampires and fears of sexual deviance go together. And the way this is tied by Le Fanu to homosexuality, I find very telling about how like those two things were viewed in almost the exact same light. Like pedophilia and homosexuality were viewed almost intrinsic to each other, you know? And it's still that way to get today, you know? We have like drag queens are like, oh, they're touching our kids. The drag queens are touching kids. Drag queens don't want to touch your kids. Okay? I promise you, drag queens don't want to touch your kids. Just keep them away from Father Paul, okay? Please. That's all I'm saying. But yeah. That's Carmilla. It is an incredible book. Thank you for listening to my rant on vampirism and vampires and Bram Stoker and gay people. I'm probably going to make more of these videos because I have a whole collection of Anne Rice. And I think that is important to discuss if you want to discuss vampirism. So thank you for staying and thank you for watching. Have a good day.